We're happy that you took this time out of your day to realize how important backup and disaster recovery might be to your business. Um, I've got Chris DeMartini with us from StorageCraft. I want to give him a chance to introduce himself. First, I'll introduce myself, though. My name is James Markley. I am the Enterprise Business Development Manager for DataTech, and also the Director of our Compliance Management Division. I focus primarily on our mid-market and enterprise level customers, uh, really enabling them more from a C-level to make decisions for their business about IT and IT management and how they can integrate different systems into their infrastructure and into their business to bring them to the next level and really focus on driving operational costs down in the long term. So, Chris, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, appreciate that. My name is Chris DeMartini. I've been with StorageCraft for a little over 5 years now. Prior to joining StorageCraft, I was an IT director for 20 years. So I have the wonderful experience of sitting on both sides of the table, both from a vendor's perspective as well as many sleepless nights as IT director with several different firms over this 20 years. And my role with StorageCraft is essentially supporting our premier partners like DataTech to make sure that that their and their customers are up to date on all the latest trends and all the latest software, in addition to make sure that they're installed and using them properly to provide you hopefully an end-to-end solution.
So, Chris, I think one of the things that'll be interesting as we go through this conversation, and I know that when I was an IT director myself, I thought I had a solid backup strategy. I said, "Oh, cool, I make backups and we push them somewhere else, and then I can kind of restore from if I ever need to." But we never really thought about the disaster recovery aspects. And I think StorageCraft does an amazing job at really communicating that and enabling customers to focus on that and to really make that part of their business. So I'm looking forward to what we're going to present to these guys today, and girls and attendees in general. So we'll go ahead and get started off here. And really what we want to focus on is what is disaster recovery? I think from an IT perspective, what I typically hear from customers is that they have a disaster recovery plan, and that they've tested it and that it's all great. My running joke with most IT managers in general is, when's the last time you tested your backup? So
Absolutely.
uh, that's usually the one, right? So it's like the one thing we don't like to talk about.
I,
So
I love going to asking people to raise their hands and hold them accountable, because we all know we all get too busy and it's the last thing to be tested. But I think you've heard me say this before, but I don't even like to call it DR and backups anymore. I like to call it recovery, because if you can't recover, your DR plan and your backup doesn't mean anything. So you got to make sure that you test that recovery.
right, right. I think I told somebody one time. I said, if you ever ask your IT manager when how well their backups are, or how functioning their backups are, and they tell you they're great, tell them you want to see a DR plan tomorrow, and you want them to do a mock disaster recovery, and that's usually
Yeah,
enough to make somebody lose some sleep.
and to take it one step further now, it's really how long does it take to recover, right? So, especially as we get more and more complex networks, we get hybrid networks, we get everybody, cloud is the word of the, I don't know, the decade now. It really depends on how long it takes you to recover, because how long can your business sustain to be down? So it's not just good enough that you recover, it's how quickly you're back up and running. And
Right,
that's
right.
this is important to test.
I definitely think so. I mean, the level of reliance right now on IT in relation to how much data your company may need at any given moment from your computer systems or your cloud services, is mission critical right now. And it may not have been the case, 15 years ago or 10 years ago even, but now it's a core critical piece of your business.
Absolutely.
So when we talk about backup and disaster recovery, the buzzwords were backup, disaster recovery. Then it became business continuity and disaster recovery. And really, I think ultimately going back to what Chris is saying, it's disaster recovery. Really, what are we doing prior to a disaster to make sure we can actually recover from that disaster? And these could be anything from, for a resumption of business, and this could be anything from a natural disaster. We talk about hurricanes a lot in Florida. Some of the things that you can't plan for. In here it says terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, but let's look at the last year. The pandemic for the world was a disaster, and really that's a disaster that we have to plan for. And it doesn't mean that it's anything you would ever think of, but how do you actually recover from even something as simple as that? And that is, it's core to how we approach our backup process. It's core to how we access our data. Right now, we're specifically focusing on the backup aspects of that, but really your disaster recovery plan has to take into account everything. It could be a bad Windows patch. It could be failed hardware. It could be a server crash. It could be compromised data. So I think that's the one thing that I hope that we're all able to take away at the end of this conversation is that, this StorageCraft as a whole really has a product line out there between their Shadow Protect, their OneSafe, and their Shadow Safe products that are supposed to enable businesses to, one, recover from a disaster, and two, scale in the event there is a disaster. How do you scale correctly, and how do you recover as quickly as you possibly can? So that's what we're going to kind of go over today. So going into this, the number one question that we always like to ask people is, why is disaster recovery important for your business? If you ask a business owner, they're going to tell you one thing. They'll tell you, disaster recovery is important to me because I want to make sure my business can still function. If you ask an IT manager, they're going to tell you it's important to them because they don't want to have a end user come and tell them that they're ever missing data, or have the company owner or CEO asking them how fast it's going to take for them to recover. But really what we need to do is look at what the most common causes of interruption in business are. And it's not just, okay, we had a server that failed. It goes across a lot of different areas. So when we talk about common causes of interruption in business, we're talking about things like power and telecom failure. Think about in your business how reliant you may be right now on cloud services, as an example. If you have a telecom failure, how are you accessing those cloud services? Where is that data? Can you actually get to that data? Um, a lot of businesses now are making the decision to co-locate. So that's an example. System failures, hardware, virus, negligence, natural disasters, local emergencies, workplace violence or theft, supply chain, public response to crisis. We talked about the pandemic and data corruption. Um, I know, like, as an example, for me in my role, and Chris maybe has some stories too, but in my role, I typically see customers that aren't customers for data tech yet, and they call us and they become our customers because they got hit with ransomware. That's the new buzzword out there. That's everything that's out there. And that's how we typically run across an interruption business. Chris, what kind of things are you seeing right now in the market as far as common causes of interruption?
Yeah, I think ransomware is obviously the biggest one right now because it's all over the news. And it purely is disruption of business, right? You talk about what institutes a disaster. I mean, it may just be a disgruntled employee, never mind someone that's breaching your network. So the important thing to take away from here is that this is just not a function of IT, right? This is a business discussion that needs to be had with, you know, um, whether it's a vendor like StorageCraft or partner like DataTech, because there's resources that just go outside, just server failures or data loss, that obviously kind of cross map with IT, but it's just more than that. So I could probably list about 50 stories, literally from a cruise ship being in a way of a line of sight internet and an office being down, all the way to a disgruntled employee lighting fire to a server room, over my years here at StorageCraft. So it's not something you can prepare for, just saying, oh, we don't have to worry about hurricanes. We're good, because it's going to be something else that bites you. So it's not a matter of when, it's a matter of if, it's a matter of when it happens.
You mentioned something a minute ago about, really a part of a larger business discussion, right? A larger leadership discussion and organization. I just had a customer I was meeting with yesterday, and we were talking about how do you actually back up your environment? And they said, well, we do backups and we offsite them. And we were looking at the infrastructure side of it as an example. And we really got into the continuity discussion. Okay, that's great, we're backing up, but you have all this infrastructure. Where are we actually keeping that infrastructure at? And what's our continuity plan look like in terms of how you restore? And the response from a leadership perspective was, okay, well, we a lot of our services are cloud services. So we're not worried about our continuity side of it because it's all in the cloud. But what the one thing was that wasn't being taken into account from a leadership side in the organization was, well, what about your Active Directory?
Right.
If you lose your Active Directory, it's great you have everything in the cloud, but you're relying on that for DHCP, DNS. I mean, there was all kinds of things they're relying on that for, let alone some small file storage they don't really need on a day-to-day basis, but they need it for historical. And I think that's really part of what if you're attending and you're an IT manager, or you're running an IT department, that's part of the conversations that need to be projected upwards in the organization, in terms of, we bring our intrinsic knowledge to leadership to say this is what we need to start to address and think about, because the cloud becomes something that people look at as a safety blanket, right? They say, oh, well, it's all in the cloud, it's okay.
Yeah, it really does. To use a cliche, it takes a village, right? And again, for those of us sitting, here that are in the IT department, you have to make the organization aware. And then if you're, an executive, you have to question, and you have to, have other people look at it. It's not a one size fits all strategy. It's unique to every different business, and there's 20 different exposures. So it really does, take a team effort from, executive to financial to IT, to, outside resources that you can leverage. It's a risk that you just don't want to take these days.
Right. I think one of the things that I realized when I was going through this as an IT manager was I always felt like there had to be a justification and analysis for why we made the decisions we did in backup and disaster recovery. Well, why, it costs X amount, where does X amount come from? And that kind of rolls into this next part of this presentation. You really get into it. And the question that we have to ask ourselves as a company in general is, what's our revenue impact look like? How much revenue are we going to lose if our business operations are interrupted? And that really adds into, your operational expense associated with business operations too, right? You talk about your payroll costs, your potential lost revenue from either a lost sale or a lost revenue generating activity, whatever that may be. Maybe it's billing or it's a customer relationship. And then when you really add all that up and you figure that out, and this is where it comes into being really a group effort and taking a village, quote unquote, you're able to take that and correlate that to an hourly, weekly, and monthly cost and figure out what does that truly look like for my business. You take the average business right now that is, maybe they're just a 15, 20 user company, and you're talking about maybe a ransomware scenario. It could take a solid 6 to 8 months before they finally stabilize again. And what's the revenue impact across that look like? And so I think that's important to really do some financial analysis on, and it helps to increase the value associated with disaster recovery. And the question really doesn't become so much what does it cost me? It more becomes what are you willing or able to spend to protect your company versus risking an outage, and the cost associated with that. I see somebody said it's terrible when operations are interrupted in any business, but especially hospitality. And right now, airlines, hotels, transportation. I just saw that pop up in the chat, so I wanted to point that out. That's a great point. I've had a company that, or I was reading a summary that said that 67% of small businesses fail within the first year following a ransomware attack. And it's just because they can't recover. The sheer cost of recovery just exceeds the revenue that they've lost, and they can't even recover from it. So, yep, you lose customer trust, you lose all kinds of things, and really, most of all, I think the one thing for us as a business owner or IT manager, you lose trust in your own data. You truly feel. I told somebody one day, I said the only way to explain the way a ransomware scenario feels is you feel violated.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
and to your point of ransomware, just because it is such a hot topic, there's just too many people out there today that are just trying to look at the prevention, right? You lose data, you always think recovery. When you talk about ransomware, and I get frustrated listening to the news and all these people talking about, well, why didn't they have security in place? It's irrelevant if you have security in place, because someone can just walk it into the building. So it's not if you get it again, it's how you recover from it. So it goes right back to the main topic of what we're talking today is just
right.
How quickly can you get that data back?
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen it, with especially, and I'll add an accolade to the StorageCraft product, which is why we're very heavy partners with StorageCraft, and that's our preferred go-to backup product. Is that we've I've seen servers. We actually have a live demo on our YouTube page. I can have Mackenzie from our marketing department send it out to the attendees after this, where we've done live, HSRs, high speed restore, server restores and had them done in 15, 20 minutes. I've seen them where it takes, 2.5, 3 hours, and that's a full blown SQL server. So knowing that you could, let's say I kind of use this as an analogy. You could come in the morning, drink your coffee. It's 9 a.m. You look at it, your server's down, and by lunchtime you're back up and running as in full operations, and you rebuilt your entire server. That's a nice pill to swallow, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So So the other part of this is, we talk about, the cost of loss of revenue. If a disaster was to occur, how long can you really be out of operation? At what point is it going to negatively impact your business? And that's the continuity aspects, right? So we have revenue loss, which we talk about, which is, really how much revenue are you going to lose and what's that cost you? But how long can you actually afford to be out of operation? Um, Chris at the beginning of the conversation mentioned the recovery. We talk about mean time to recovery or recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. You know, at what point in terms of your business operations do you cross that threshold where you just can't be non-operational anymore? Um, and I think, Chris, do you have anything about, when we talk about RTO and RPO, do you have anything that is really a good starting point where people could start that conversation in a business?
So the last statistics that I'd heard is that most small business can't sustain more than a 2 to 3 day outage. That just being down for that long will put them out of business. That probably is about a 2-year-old stat. I don't know if I have something updated to that, but it can't be too far from that. So in that sense, it's unbelievably shocking how just a small interruption could cause tremendous damage. When it comes to recovery time and recovery point, the great thing about the way we align our products is we really allow you to choose that, and we allow you to choose it as well as weigh it. Right. So we talk about, if you're down, how quickly can we get your essential services up? But does everything have to be up? So the way the StorageCraft approaches disaster recovery is very in the hands of the customer. How much or little you want to spend. We can get you to limp along. We can get you 100% back up, in 4 to 6 hours. But it really depends on how much you're going to put behind it, how much planning, how much potential hardware, how much software. So it's really great in the sense that you can sit down with someone like myself, or again the engineers over at DataTech, to customize it, to say what's affordable for me, and what I need for my business. We're not giving you a one size fits all, take it or leave it approach to backup. It really comes down to every individual can be customizable and tailored to your own business.
Right. I think one of the things too, and to highlight going back to that, is that there's some organizations that'll look and they'll say, okay, we're gonna sell you a product, and you can take that product and you can do all the bells and whistles with it, right? But they don't really talk you through the bells and whistles. One of the things that I appreciate about our relationship with StorageCraft is that StorageCraft and DataTech have a very strong relationship in relation to how we work with one another. On our side, our account management team and our project management team, that is our number one priority, is getting a backup solution in place. We are in a position as an organization where we look at it, and that is our number one priority coming into a customer, whether it's a new customer or a customer that comes to us and says, hey, I want to look at my business continuity plan. That is all we focus on from the very beginning, is what is the backup scenario and the disaster recovery side look like. But not only that, spending the time with the organization to understand how your business operations truly function, right? Because it's great if we talk about recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives, but if we don't actually spend the time to understand how your business organization operates, or how that business unit operates inside your organization, then it's really a moot point, right, Chris? Like, everybody says, okay, well, here it's great. We talked about business continuity, and we're going to do all these things, and we're only going to be down for 6 or 8 hours. but
Yeah,
nobody spent the time to say, well, what kind of software applications are we running, or what, what business units are the most important or most impacted, and how do we actually bring those back online? Like,
right. So we like to rock around the office and talk about the sentence "no data is created equal," and it really has as technology's evolved and IT's really into everything, right? I age myself. I remember when schools and hospitals and retail stores didn't have full blown networks, and now everybody does, right? So there's a difference between your core services, your core applications, your unstructured data, right? And not only that, but customers or companies can't throw data away because of all the compliance that's being thrown around as well. So it really is it is a soup to nuts kind of thing where you have to understand what the business is, how it operates, what is mission critical, what is not, and to make a fair assessment and really kind of protect yourself again at that level to say, hey, listen, this is what can make me happy, but this is where I really want to be. And that's a huge variation on services and costs, right? So it's a very fine balancing act, and unless you sit down with people that understand what's going on and people that are going to be honest as well, to make sure that's customized the way you need to be done.
right, right. So, as we get into it too, from our perspective, and this is, I'm talking to more of the IT managers in the room right now, but we'll talk about it from an executive leadership perspective too. We talk about business continuity planning, and we're talking about disaster recovery. The thing that we have to really take into account though is what are the business functions look like? We were talking just now about no data is created equal. Well, same with positions, or same with uh, departments inside of an organization. When we talk about how do you actually recover as a business, or how do you plan for continuity, we have to think about things like our phones, computers, websites that we access, employee access to infrastructure, travel. We're going to talk about temporary employee relocation. How do your relocated employees connect to your system? How do you recover? Data tech as an example. We have customers that maybe they have very strong on-premise infrastructure, but at the end of the day, they're offloading it to a cloud environment. If you're offloading that cloud into a cloud environment from a backup perspective, how do you actually access that data? 9 times out of 10, when I meet a new customer, you may get a laugh out of this, Chris. When I meet a new customer, they tell me, they've come to Data Tech for the first time. We're putting a StorageCraft product out there, and they say, well, that's great. I already back up my stuff to the cloud. But what they don't think about is how long does it take to get that data back out of the cloud, back to their on-prem and recover, right?
Or how much it costs. A lot
Right,
of providers could pay. You have to pay for that to get
right,
your own data back. That's
right,
ridiculous.
right. I know, like in our case, the thing that we really value in the StorageCraft product is the flexibility to push those backups to different locations, right? We're able to leverage our Tampa data center that we have. We have a location in Marietta. We can push backups to Microsoft Azure or AWS, so that being able to push those to multi-point or multi-location is critical. Um, I think
Yeah, so
that's
that brings up the buzz, the 3-2-1, right? That people talk about with your backups, and uh, I used to kind of hate it, and now it's a great discussion point for are you protecting your data? And you're talking about the traditional 3-2-1 is 3 copies of data on 2 separate types of media, one of them being cloud, or off location, right? And then now you've got 3-2-1-1, which is out, which is very similar. Three copies, 2 types of media, which could be spinning disks in multiple locations. I think tape's pretty much gone the wayside these days, for again the reasons that we talk about: cloud recoverability, reliability. But the last one in the 3-2-1-1 scenario is immutability, which is what is kind of the new buzz that's out there today. And you're going to see a lot of vendors, including StorageCraft, trying to bridge that gap, so that way you do have that immutability to recover from ransomware or a virus.
right, right. So when we really get into this, what should disaster recovery include? We start to talk about, not just, we talked earlier, but we're not just talking about the backup side of things, right? We're actually talking about disaster recovery consisting of backing up. So that's the 3-2-1 methodology that Chris mentioned, or 3-2-1-1 as we get into more of the security side and the immutability of files. Um, We get into manage. So, are we managing the backup image retention? How far back can we go? It's all great if, we realize, hey, you know what, today we had a disaster, and maybe that disaster was a system file issue, or there was a patch that was applied incorrectly or something like that. But if the best backup we have still has that patch applied and it's from 2 days ago, we're just going to end up in the same scenario 48 hours from now when we actually restore from a backup potentially, right? We talk about testing. So we're saying, are we validating those backup images, and are we simulating data access and recovery? I was mentioning earlier that when we talk about backups and we say, okay, well, how many people back up their data? And, if you ask an IT group of IT managers in a room, you may get every IT manager raises their hand, and you say, okay, well, how many of you manage your data? How many manage the retention? How far back can you go? And you may have people that say, um, oh, I back up, 30 days worth or 60 days worth. Okay, that's all good too, right? But then you get into the testing part, and that's the part that usually ends up separating the crowd. Where you're able to say, okay, how many of you actually test this? Where you're actually able to say, okay, I validated my images work. I've simulated that I can access my data, and I can actually recover from it. And that's, like I said, that's the part that separates the crowd. And then you get into recovery. When you talk about recovery, how are you recovering? And then, what's that process look like? And how do you design that process to actually work with your organization? So when we talk about disaster recovery plans, you can really break it down into about 6 different key things to look at. So number one, taking an inventory of all your hardware and IT assets. And when I say IT assets, I'm not just talking about how many servers do I have, how many workstations do I have. An IT asset in this definition is all my data, everything that touches the network. So it's software, it's going to be your flat files, it's going to be databases, it's going to be your servers, it'll be your workstations, it could be even your infrastructure too. And we talk about like firewalls, access points, your disaster recovery appliance, all of that. Then identify your critical software applications, data, and the hardware required to run them. So once you've identified all your assets and your hardware, you have all of that. Now you need to know, okay, well, what do I need to run all that? Just if something happens and I have this backup sitting over here that can run my software, what do I need to actually run that? Because it's great that I have it, but I can't run it. That nice server that you just bought, and it turns around 3 days later and it is a part of a flood disaster because your sprinkler went off in your server room. Guess what? You don't have anything to run it on. So.
And that brings up another point. That brings James, and it brings up another point too. And again, this crosses just not IT, because your insurance has a lot to do with this. Not only do you need to know what the inventory is, so that way you can replace it, but is it insured? Is it under your plan? So, again, I don't want to get too deep outside of the focus of today's idea, but this spans departments. It just does not fall just solely on the IT organization.
Yeah, and I would add to that too. It also falls inside of some different compliance realms too, right? You may have an authority other than insurance. Even you may have a federal authority or a local authority or a state authority that says, "Hey, ultimately this is your responsibility," and you have some kind of obligation, whether it's contractual obligation or statutory obligation, to be able to recover in a critical time frame, right? So prioritizing your hardware and software restoration. So this goes back into that whole, what are your recovery points look like? Where are we actually? What's the methodology for how we actually restore if there is a disaster? If you're in a company where you say, okay, well, my number one priority is to restore my SQL server, but you haven't looked at, well, wait, I need to restore my Active Directory first because my user credentials that I'm using to authenticate my SQL server against are on my Active Directory, then your plan is actually out of order. So you have to talk about what's that restoration process look like. Documenting your IT disaster recovery plan. This is the big word, right? Everybody in IT loves this. We love documentation, don't we? It's kind of rhetorical. Nobody loves documentation, but but documenting your plan. Really make that part of what your business plan is, and then also inside of that plan, determine who your disaster recovery team is, and what those positions look like. You don't necessarily have to say it's this person, but figure out who the people are in your organization that are going to be critical to that team. It's nice to think that from an IT perspective, we can take all the responsibility for IT and make that our disaster recovery plan. But really, you need key stakeholders in the organization to be able to provide input to that plan, because there has to be buy-in to the plan of this is how we recover. So that way, when the time does come, because it's not a matter of if it's going to come, it's a matter of when. When the time does come, you have a clear methodology and you can focus on recovering the organization as quickly as possible without having to worry about people coming and lining up and asking when they're going to have access to data.
Yeah, this is a great point too. My former CEO used to call it his his bus plan, and because if I ever got hit by a bus, I had too much knowledge in my head. So again, this is really, you don't know if there's flooding or if there's a fire or whatever, that the people that you would normally rely on to recover for you, and this is also great for reason for having a partner. So to make sure that this is documented so well that somebody that isn't necessarily in that role can go ahead and follow that.
And I'll say this on our side, like, Chris, it's going back into the whole partner thing we've had, and it's been very unfortunate, some very close business friends of mine that with Data Tech have, are no longer with us, and not as a customer, but that person is no longer with us.
Right.
And you talk about that continuity side of things, having that documentation in place has been critical to making sure that transition takes place as easily as possible. Because the last thing that when any disaster happens, whether you talk about somebody departing, whether it, or you talk about a disaster, a natural disaster, or you talk about a corporate loss, things like damage or fire, things like that. The last thing you want to think about is, how do I recover my data?
Yep.
Or how do I plan for this? You want to be able just to pull out that binder and walk through it and say, okay, step 1, do this. Step 2, I do this. Step 3, I do this.
Absolutely.
And it's already been tested. You're not worried about trying to plan on the fly. So take proper steps to ensure knowledge and understanding of the plan and designated roles in the scenario. Do walk through this plan with the people that are inside of those roles. So you're able to say, okay, let's actually walk through this and make sure that everybody understands what they're supposed to do if we have a disaster recovery scenario. And then lastly, make sure that you schedule periodic reviews. We put a plan together and you go in and you say, okay, well, we have this plan, and somebody comes back and says, okay, well, show it to us, and the last update on it is 2 years ago. That's a very hard plan to try and implement usually, because business changes so quickly. So make sure it's aligned with your current business objectives, make sure that it's current, and make sure that you spend the time reviewing that. Now, every business could be a little bit different. You may say, hey, I only need to review this once a year, and this is why, but establish that as part of your plan. The first sentence of your plan should be, this disaster recovery plan is reviewed on an annual basis or a quarterly basis, and then keep a periodic table at the back of that actually shows when you've done the last reviews and shows the updates made throughout, because that'll also help when you're trying to look back and you're saying, where did our organization start and where are we now? Because you may miss something when you do an update on a plan too, right? So from a disaster recovery solution as a service solution side of things, we want to talk a little bit about what disaster recovery as a service looks like. And I'm going to use the owner of our company's perspective on this. And Chris, you may get a laugh out of this. The owner of our company's name is Chris also. And Chris told me that when you have disaster recovery as a service, it's not just about making sure that you also have your data, because ultimately you want to have your data, right? And it's not about making sure that you have somebody that watches it, because we're going to do that too. It's also about making sure you have somebody else you can hold accountable for it.
Yeah, 100%.
So
why good partnerships. That's why good partnerships are there. So
yeah, you're able to move the accountability from yourself to somebody else. So
yeah.
So disaster recovery as a service, it's a cloud computing and backup service model. It's going to use cloud resources to protect applications and data from disruption caused by disaster. So what you're really benefiting from this, right? We talked about number one, you're moving, the responsibility or the onus, I guess you could say, but that really comes kind of as part of this expertise side of things, right? You're gaining a level of expertise through a partner like Data Tech, combined with StorageCraft, that may not exist in your current team, or it does exist in your current team, but you don't have the resources or time to be able to focus on making sure that you're that number one expert on everything in relation to business continuity. You're getting a cost control aspect to that, because in cost control, we can actually look at it and say, let's turn this from a capital expense to more of an operating expense, and let's figure out how we can adjust the disaster recovery. How can we adjust the disaster recovery side of things long term to make sure that it meets our current cost objectives, right? So, like, infrastructure changes, your organization changes over time, your operational needs change over time. So, how do we actually take that and control those costs to make sure they meet your current business needs at all times? Simplicity, it's very simple. This is the person that does my disaster recovery. This is how I perform my disaster recovery. Here's my reports associated with it. There's not this multi-pronged approach where you have 15 different products out there doing 15 different things. We're talking about one single pane of glass. And then resiliency, being able to offload the disaster recovery side of things to multiple different locations or to multiple different resources, and not just having to operate within your four walls. If you have a server in your four walls and you talk about backing that server up, now to have a backup solution, you have to have a backup server. But then you still don't have resiliency because you're still limited to that one location. So to have true resiliency, you have to have multiple locations, multiple different investments in infrastructure. In an as a service type of model, we can actually take that and we can say, okay, let's go ahead, and we already have the platform existing. Let's take that and extend it down to you as a customer. So I kind of broke this down into 3 different areas. We can talk about each one. That's why we've got Chris on the phone. So you have more of the on-premise typical, what we look up as backups, right? Backup and recovery too, which is really the Shadow Protect SPX, which is what we've kind of talked about a little bit. And that's backup and recover. The Shadow Safe really is focused, I think, in my opinion, when I talk about it from a sales perspective, on the recover side. And then this One Safe is really focused on a lot of recoverability and scalability. So Chris, did you want to talk about these different solutions that we have out there? Because I think it's important for people to understand we're not just purely talking about one single product that only does the one thing you need it to do.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, right? So we all know that unfortunately, finances dictate IT a lot more than we'd like them to in a lot of cases as well. So the way our portfolio works is really, I want to say, big, bigger, biggest. It really, starting from our, single agent backup product all the way to, full infrastructure. I like to break out DR and archiving as 2 separate things. Most customers and end users think of it as the same, but you being able to recover a file from 10 years ago is not DR. That's archiving. And then you start getting into, what the costs are. And unfortunately, again, when we talked about recovery time and recovery point, they're very, very cost driven as well. And I always tend to talk to customers about, your DR plan typically, and this is horrible, but the most expensive part of it's usually the storage that goes associated with it. We all think storage costs are coming down, but no one deletes anything anymore. We're all carrying, a couple of terabyte in our pockets probably right now, or at least a couple of 100 gig. So again, the solution's built that way. And the great part, again, dealing with, partners like DataTech, is that they have a suite of services to accommodate, all the budgets and all the needs that you have. So what we do, both from a StorageCraft and DataTech perspective, is just present to you. It's like, hey, this is going to cover you basic. This is going to make sure, this is your SLA. And then we can talk about, which one is appropriate for you. But again, both from a StorageCraft and a DataTech, very, very customizable. We're here to make to make your business work and make it recoverable, but do it as cost effective as we can. And a lot of vendors out there can't say that. You're looking at 6 figures for entry level, and that's not the way we do business here.
Right. All right. I think that's the one of the things that I can appreciate about StorageCraft as a product is that or as a brand rather, I want to say, because there's so many other product lines inside of that. But the fact that we can take the individual business need, look at that business need and say, what's the solution that fits? One of the things I think is really cool, and I talk about to companies now, is about unstructured data, and I talk about separating your file server instance from the actual flat files themselves using like the OneSafe solution, and that's something that like blows people's mind, right? Like, hey, I had this 4 terabyte file server, and you're telling me I don't have to restore the whole 4 terabyte file server, right, Chris?
Yeah, and so the OneSafe product specifically is where we get into immutability, and it's really a unique product. I don't run into just in I probably had about 15 meetings this week, and 14 of them I spent 45 minutes talking about this product because it's unique to it's really kind of new and unique, the technology itself. So yes, it's an insurance policy just like anything else, but it really does put cost effectiveness into enterprise, and kind of bridges that gap, even for the small business. So it's something that typically if you have 15 vendors pitching you left and right, if you're an IT director, 90%, 95% of the customers I sit down with have never heard the story, and have never seen a product like it. So I love it. It's one of my favorite products to talk about because it's really one of those products where in most cases I'm saving customers money and providing a service that really ensures that they can recover, that unquestionably they can recover their data, but regardless of whether they've got ransomware or a virus.
Right, right. So I would kind of cap in this with that if you're looking at a product like this, it's worth finding a partner, or data tech is one, of course, and having a discussion at a high level about what does the business objectives truly look like. What does your current environment look like? How do you operate? How do you function? And spending the time with data tech and StorageCraft to truly let us understand what your overall goal and objective is as an organization. Because any one of these products can ultimately probably achieve one of your objectives, but finding the one that exactly meets your objective long term is important. You go down the path of, okay, I implemented Shadow Protect and I'm doing backups and I can recover from those backups, but that may not truly take into account the whole concept of continuity. It may take into the concept of disaster recovery. You may look at it and say, hey, you know what? If we went more of the shadow safe route, we may end up in a position where we have some more continuity. And then you talk about data. And now, because people have so much data coming into and out of their network, and they have so much data they're storing locally, just from years and years and years worth of work, that's when you really get into this whole unstructured data side of things. And you start talking about how much data are we truly storing and how do we get that data back? Because the cost of backups could scale exponentially if we're not addressing that as well. So,
Yeah, and to your point, it's interesting. And again, I mentioned those 20 meetings. Um, if I expected to go into those 20 customers and have the same conversation, I'd be nuts. Everybody does. Everybody is 100% unique. And the great thing about actually, I love sitting in data tech offices because I do learn things that are not in my wheelhouse and vice versa. From a StorageCraft perspective, we want to educate. We want to make sure that that you're doing it right. You're doing it for your the way your business is set up, but also do it cost effectively, because we all know that traditional line items almost don't exist anymore. And especially with virtualization and everything going on, everything touches everything. And if you can get a solution that that can erase 3 or 4 of your traditional light items, or at least free up that cash for other projects, and put it into your DR or your long-term storage plans, it's a conversation worth having. And again, a lot of these products that we position both from a operational and a capital cost end up cost savings if you're willing to spend the time. So it's worth having the conversation.
right. But I wanted to go ahead and flip it over because we're at a point now where I think it'd be worth asking if there's question and answers. I saw a question come through and it says, do you work with a lot of international businesses and any hotel companies? So I'll answer that first as data tech, and then I'll let Chris jump in and answer it on his side, because I know the answer on his side, but everybody else doesn't. Data tech, yes, we do. So we have companies. I kind of joke around when I talk to clients and I say, if you want a company that we support in Hong Kong, I've got it. If you want somebody in Amsterdam, I've got it. So if you're anywhere between Hong Kong and Amsterdam in the US, I've got you taken care of. So it's pretty much the world. And we have some companies that are doing outsourcing over in Southeast Asia that we support, Southwest Asia that we support too. So we definitely work in that regard. So Chris, I'll let you answer on the StorageCraft side, because I'm pretty sure I know the answer to that. But.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit. So for those of you who don't know, StorageCraft just merged with ArcServe, and we've basically doubled our portfolio. Both ArcServe and StorageCraft are international companies. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say the brand, but I know for a fact that my specific client, I actually take care of this client, has over 6,000 properties in the United States, both corporately managed as well as franchises when it comes to hotels. So if you want to reach out on the side, and I can confirm if I can actually allow or say that brand out loud, I'll happily do that if I get permission. But we absolutely do.
Yeah. So I wanted to go ahead and ask if there's any other questions. I had a question come through. It came through a different channel, but they were asking, they said, how often do people think of testing their business continuity plan? I think that ends up, really comes down to that conversation you have to have with your leadership. What, as a leader, as a stakeholder in the organization, a key stakeholder, and also from an executive management perspective, determining how often you review your business continuity plan ultimately is going to be something the business has to sit and have a discussion about, right? How often do we want to test this, and then what's our business impact if we don't? It kind of goes back to that original conversation about RPO, RTO. Same thing when you talk about the plan itself. How often are we testing that? It's going to come down to at what point do we look at it and say it's not worth the investment to test it versus it is worth the investment to test it?
Yeah. So and also at StorageCraft, we've gone one step further because we know people lie and people don't test their backups. We actually built into the product an automated way to test the backups. So you actually have the ability to spin up machines and get an actual picture of it sent to you. So we try to do our best to make sure that you're not sitting there with your hand kind of up if you're testing. But again, it really, you don't want to take too much time. But I would make sure that when it comes to testing, I would make sure that it's done quarterly.
I have a customer. I'll give you so you mentioned the testing. I have a customer that right now gets that. They get virtual boot reports every morning.
Yeah.
And it just sends them a screenshot and shows them that, okay, the machine actually booted. And that's the backup test. They're able to say, okay, I know that it restored, or it could restore if it needed to. The other part I wanted to add to that, Chris, because you kind of mentioned it a little bit, is the way that the backup chain is actually tested itself too. So being able to see, okay, is the backup test is the backup itself actually performing the way it should?
Yeah.
Is the chain integrity maintained?
Yeah, so that's a great point, and this differentiates us, StorageCraft, from other vendors. And I have this conversation daily. So one of the coolest things when I first started with StorageCraft was kind of the philosophy that StorageCraft took, and when we present the file back to you, we actually present a copy of it back to you, because whether you are doing a virtual boot, which is an entire machine, or just a file folder, we present that copy to you because we don't want to ruin the integrity of that first file, right? If you open and close an Excel doc 400 times, it risks corruption. Is it going to get corrupted? Not necessarily, but it risks corruption. So when StorageCraft makes a file, we do verify it against the hash to make sure that it's properly done, it's complete, and the integrity of the file. And then we never touch it again before, so that way we can't corrupt it to opening it. So we truly are not worried about the backup. We're truly worried about the recovery, because that's all that matters.
So I did see one last question inside of here that says, can we please get a replay of the session or the slides emailed to us afterwards? Yes, I will. We will have Mackenzie, our marketing coordinator, send out this presentation, so that way you have a copy of that. And it also has Chris and my contact information in there as well. So that way, if you kind of want to have those conversations at a different level, maybe specific to your business that you may not want to ask even in this venue, you can definitely reach out to us and we can have those conversations. I know Chris and myself, we both enjoy really having discussions with businesses about how you operate, what your overall objectives look like. Ultimately, I think that we're both evangelists in the technical area and just want to see businesses get in a better position, ideally we would love to have somebody do business with us, but we want to see you in a better position overall. So
yeah, I think it's really about education in that standpoint, and everybody, again, to your point, James, what we want everybody's business, but I'm not compensated in that respect, so I'm always happy to sit down and educate and talk and it's unless you're engulfed in it daily, you're probably never going to be caught up, and I don't even consider myself completely caught up. So please reach out with any questions or concerns.
All right, and finally, I think that we had a drawing for a Amazon gift card. So I wanted to go ahead and let Mark Baxter know that he was the winner of that gift card. We will have our marketing department reach out to you so that they can go ahead and take care of that. And I wanted to close out and tell everybody thank you for attending. If you do have 30 seconds, please complete a 3-question survey that we've put the link on here for. I know it's kind of quick to take this link down. Mackenzie just popped it into the chat, so you have it there as well. And then you'll also get a copy of this presentation so you can answer that survey too if you have the time. We do appreciate you attending. We look forward to seeing you on our next webinar, and we hope that you all have a great day and a great weekend.